My name is Tracy Williams, and at 71, I never thought my own son would choose his in-laws over my eyesight. That check for $20,000 was my only hope to see clearly again. Instead, he spent $150,000 on his father-in-law's birthday party while I sat in darkness. I trusted him with everything, including my finances after my husband died. Little did he know that life has its own way of balancing the scales. If you are watching this right now, let me know where you are from, and subscribe to hear what happened when I closed that door. I spent over 40 years as an elementary school teacher in a small town just outside of Seattle. Every day, I would wake up before the sun, prepare breakfast for my husband Albert, and head to my classroom where I taught third graders. Those were simple but beautiful days. Albert worked as a civil engineer for the local government. We never had extravagant wealth, but we had enough for a comfortable life in our modest 3-bedroom home with the blue shutters. Albert insisted on painting himself every 5 years. Albert and I were married for 45 wonderful years before cancer took him away from me. Even now, 5 years later, I sometimes wake up and reach for his side of the bed expecting to feel his warmth. We had our struggles like any couple, but we faced them together hand in hand. The hardest part of losing him wasn't just the loneliness that followed, but also navigating life's practical matters without him. Albert had always handled our finances, insurance, and home repairs. Gregory was our only child. From the moment he was born, he was the light of our lives. As a baby, he had these bright blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with such intensity. Albert would joke that our son was already planning his future empire before he could even speak. Looking back now, perhaps there was some truth to that observation. Greg was always bright, always a step ahead of other children his age. By 3rd grade, he was reading at a 6th grade level. By middle school, he was excelling in advanced math courses. Albert and I were so proud, attending every academic competition, every science fair where Greg would inevitably win first place with his intricate projects. Yet even then there were signs I chose to ignore. Greg wasn't just interested in learning for learning's sake. He was obsessed with the recognition, the trophies, the certificates that came with his achievements. When he would win 2nd place instead of 1st, he would become inconsolable, tearing up his certificates and refusing to display them. At the time, I chalked it up to healthy ambition, a drive to excel that would serve him well later in life. As Greg entered high school, his focus shifted. It wasn't enough to be the smartest anymore. He wanted the right clothes, the right friends, the right car. Albert and I stretched our teacher and civil servant salaries to give him what we could, but it was never enough. Greg would compare our home to the mansions his wealthier friends lived in. He would ask why his father couldn't get a real job that paid more. College was a turning point. Greg received a partial scholarship to a prestigious university, and Albert and I emptied our savings to cover the rest. We were so proud watching him walk across that campus on his first day, the first in either of our families to attend such an esteemed institution. It was during his sophomore year that he met Diane. She came from old money, her family name attached to buildings across the city. The first time Greg brought her home, I could see how uncomfortable she was in our modest living room, how she declined my homemade apple pie with a thin smile and a comment about her special diet. After meeting Diane, Greg changed even more dramatically. His calls home became less frequent. When he did visit, he spent more time on his phone than talking to us. He began to adopt strange mannerisms, ways of speaking that sounded nothing like the boy we had raised. Albert would furrow his brow after these visits and say, "I don't know who that young man is, but he's wearing our son's face." I had hoped marriage would settle Greg down, help him find his center again, but their wedding was just another symptom of the problem. Despite our limited means, as I was now living on a widow's pension, Greg insisted on an elaborate ceremony at a vineyard estate that cost more than our house. I offered what I could, which Greg dismissed, as barely covering the flowers. I later learned that Diane's parents had paid for most of it, something Greg seemed both grateful for and resentful about. After the wedding visits became even more scarce, Greg and Diane purchased a luxury condominium in the city, with views of the water and amenities I could hardly comprehend. Each time I visited, Greg would give me a tour as if showing off a museum, pointing out designer names I didn't recognize and technology I couldn't operate. About 2 years ago, I began noticing changes in my vision. At first, it was just a bit of blurriness when reading before bed. Then colors started to seem less vibrant, and lights at night developed halos around them. I started bumping into furniture that had been in the same place for decades. Reading became nearly impossible, even with the strongest drugstore reading glasses. Television was just shapes and colors. Worst of all, I couldn't clearly see the faces of the few friends who still came to visit. My doctor confirmed what I had suspected: cataracts in both eyes, fairly advanced. The good news, he said, is that this is completely treatable with surgery. The bad news is that your insurance plan doesn't cover the full cost. The price tag was $20,000 for both eyes, a sum that might as well have been $20 million on my fixed income. After weeks of squinting at bills and struggling to cook without cutting myself, I made the difficult decision to ask Greg for help. By this point, he had convinced me to let him manage my finances after Albert died, claiming his business degree made him better equipped than me to handle investments and banking. I had signed over access to my accounts, trusting that my only son would always act in my best interest. I remember clearly the day I called Greg about the cataracts despite my cloudy vision. It was a Tuesday morning, and I had rehearsed what to say several times. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed his number, not from age but from the discomfort of having to ask my child for help. "Mom, I'm heading into a meeting. Can we make this quick?" Greg answered the sounds of an office buzzing behind him. I explained about the cataracts, the surgery, and the cost. I tried to keep my voice steady to maintain some dignity, even as I asked for such a large sum. There was a long pause before he responded. $20,000. That's significant. Are you sure this isn't something that can wait, or maybe there's a payment plan? The doctor says my vision will only get worse, I explained, and I'm struggling to do even basic things around the house now. He sighed, and I could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he did when feeling pressured. "All right, let me look at your accounts and see what we can do. I'll come by this weekend with a check." That Saturday, Greg arrived at my small house 45 minutes later than he had promised. He was dressed in what I could make out to be an expensive-looking suit, checking what appeared to be a shiny watch every few minutes. I had prepared lunch, though I'd struggled to cut the vegetables evenly for the salad with my poor vision. "Sorry, I can't stay long, Mom. Diane and I have an event this evening," he said, barely touching the food I'd prepared. He pulled out a checkbook from his designer briefcase. Even with my blurry vision, I could see the gold accents gleaming on his pen as he wrote. "Here's the $20,000. I've moved some of your investments around to free up this cash." I took the check with trembling hands, tears of relief filling my already cloudy eyes. "Thank you, Greg. You don't know what this means to me." He shrugged, already standing up. "That's what family's for, right? Just make sure you schedule the surgery soon. That's a lot of money to have sitting around." I called the clinic the very next day and scheduled the procedure for the following month. The receptionist was kind, taking down all my information and confirming that they would process the check immediately, so everything would be ready for my surgery date. That evening, I called my dear friend Sandra, one of the few people who still regularly checked on me after Albert's passing. "Sandra, I'm getting my eyes fixed. Greg gave me a check today." "Oh, Tracy, that's wonderful news. I know how much you've been struggling. Albert would be so proud of Greg for taking care of you." Her words warmed my heart, and for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. I began making plans for after the surgery. I would rejoin the community garden. I would start reading again. Maybe I would even volunteer at the local library for their children's hour reading to little ones like I used to do with my students. The day before my scheduled surgery, I was packing a small overnight bag when my phone rang. It was the clinic. "Mrs. Williams, this is Jennifer from Seattle Vision Specialists. I'm calling because there seems to be an issue with your payment." My heart sank. "What kind of issue?" "The check you provided has been canceled. We received notification from the bank this morning." I sat down heavily on my bed, the room spinning around me. There must be some mistake. My son wrote that check himself. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Williams. Without payment, we'll have to postpone your procedure indefinitely. If you're able to arrange alternative payment, please let us know so we can reschedule." I spent the rest of the afternoon and evening calling Greg repeatedly. First it went to voicemail. Then his secretary answered and promised he would call back. By 8 o'clock that night, he finally returned my call. "Mom, I'm at a business dinner." "What's so urgent?" The clinic called. They said the check was canceled. My voice was shaking, but this time with anger rather than nervousness. "Oh, that. Yeah, there was a temporary issue with the account. Just a mix-up. I'll fix it next week, promise." "But my surgery is tomorrow morning," I protested. "Well, you'll have to reschedule. These things happen, Mom. I'll sort it out soon. Look, I've got to go. The vice president of our division just arrived." And with that, he hung up. I sat in my living room, which was now just a blur of shapes in the dimming evening light. The surgery was postponed with no new date set. My independence, my hope of regaining my clear vision, was postponed too. In the weeks that followed, my vision continued to deteriorate. Simple tasks became monumental challenges. I nearly set the kitchen on fire when I couldn't see that I'd placed a dish towel too close to the stove. I received an overdue notice for a bill I couldn't read. My neighbor Martha started coming over to help me sort through my mail and pick up groceries for me. Every few days I would call Greg, and every time there was a new excuse. "The bank is still processing the transfer," or "I've been swamped with this new project," or "Diane's father is in town, and I can't get away right now." Eventually, I began to suspect that something more was happening than just delays and bank errors. Greg had never been forgetful about money. In fact, money had always been his primary concern in life. If he wasn't providing the funds for my surgery, it wasn't because he had forgotten, it was because he had chosen not to. After nearly a month of excuses and postponed surgery, my frustration reached its peak. Sandra suggested we drive to Greg's house unannounced. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to seem like a nagging mother, but my deteriorating vision and increasing dependence on others pushed me to agree. "He's my son, Sandra. I shouldn't have to ambush him in his own home just to get a straight answer," I said as she drove us across the city to the affluent neighborhood where Greg and Diane lived. "Sometimes kids need a reminder of their responsibilities no matter how old they get," Sandra replied, her voice firm with the confidence of a woman who had raised 4 successful children of her own. As we approached Greg's address, I could make out unusual activity, even with my poor vision. Several large trucks were parked outside, and people in uniform were carrying things inside. As we got closer, I realized they were catering vans. Men and women in black and white attire were unloading trays covered in what appeared to be elaborate food displays. "Looks like they're having some kind of party," Sandra whispered as she parked across the street. We approached slowly, and I could hear Greg's voice before I could see him clearly. He was standing on his front lawn, gesturing dramatically to a man in a chef's coat. "I want this to be the most talked-about event of the year," I heard him say. "When people mention Harold Thompson's 70th birthday, I want them to remember the food, the decor, everything. $150,000 buys perfection, and that's what I expect." I froze at the sound of that number. $150,000, more than 7 times what my cataract surgery would cost. Sandra must have felt me stiffen because she took my arm to steady me. "Tracy, what is it?" Before I could respond, a woman's voice cut through the activity. "What are they doing here?" It was Diane, her tone sharp with displeasure. Even with blurry vision, I could tell she was dressed expensively, her hair and nails professionally done. Greg turned and I could make out the surprise, and then discomfort on his face as he recognized us. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I've been trying to reach you for weeks about my surgery," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. Greg glanced around nervously, then took my arm and led me away from the caterers and Diane. "This isn't a good time. We're preparing for Diane's father's birthday celebration." "I can see that," I said. "A $150,000 celebration from what I just heard." Greg's grip on my arm tightened slightly. "You don't understand how important this is. Harold Thompson is one of the most connected men in the city. This party is an investment in our future." "And what about my surgery? The check that was canceled, was that not an investment worth making?" His voice lowered to a harsh whisper. "I had to make a choice, Mom. That money had to be redirected temporarily. Diane's family expects certain things. Appearances matter in our circle." "More than your mother's eyesight?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "Don't be dramatic. It's just cataracts, not life-threatening. Once I secure my position with Harold's connections, I'll have more than enough to pay for your surgery, and then some." In that moment, I saw my son more clearly through my clouded eyes than I ever had when my vision was perfect. This wasn't a temporary financial hiccup or a banking error. My son had made a calculated decision to cancel my surgery payment and redirect those funds to impress his in-laws. "Come on, Tracy, let's go." Sandra had approached us, having overheard enough to understand what was happening. The car ride home was painful. I sat in silence, tears streaming down my face, while Sandra occasionally reached over to pat my hand. "I can't believe he would do this," I finally said as we neared my house. "Albert and I gave him everything we could. We went without so many times to make sure he had the best." "Some children forget where they came from," Sandra said gently. "But you still have options. You don't need to depend on Greg." She was right. The next day, with Sandra's help, I began the process of taking back control of my finances. We visited my bank, where I learned that Greg had been moving money from my modest investment accounts into a separate account I hadn't authorized. With my limited vision, I had to trust the bank officer to help me complete the necessary paperwork to remove Greg's access. It wasn't easy. Forms had to be signed, identification, verified accounts restructured. Sandra read everything aloud to me, guiding my hand to the proper signature lines. By the end of the day, I was exhausted but empowered. That evening, Greg called, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "The bank called me today. What do you think you're doing?" "Taking back control of what's mine," I replied. "I trusted you to look after my interests, Greg, and you betrayed that trust. After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me, by going behind my back." His voice had taken on that entitled tone that had become so familiar in recent years. "What exactly have you done for me?" "Gregory canceled the check for my surgery so you could throw a party. Left me unable to see properly, to read, to watch television, to recognize faces." "You're being ungrateful," he snapped. "I have plans for our family's future that you can't even comprehend. But no, you're too selfish to see the bigger picture." "The only thing I'm selfish about is wanting to see clearly again," I replied, my voice surprisingly calm despite the anger and hurt inside me. "Please don't call again unless you're ready to make things right." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. Over the next few weeks, I continued the difficult process of untangling my finances from Greg's control. It wasn't easy with my limited vision, but Sandra was by my side every step of the way. We discovered that Greg had been using my accounts as a source of additional funds for years, always replacing enough to avoid suspicion, but steadily draining the modest nest egg Albert had left for me. Despite my fear and the practical challenges of my failing sight, I was determined to regain my independence, both financial and physical. I needed to find a way to afford my surgery on my own, even if it meant selling possessions or moving to a smaller home. Albert had always taught me that where there's a will, there's a way, and I wasn't about to let my only son's betrayal leave me in darkness. The next 3 months were the darkest of my life, both literally and figuratively. My vision continued to deteriorate until I could barely distinguish shapes and colors. The independence I had fought to maintain after Albert's death slipped away day by day. I could no longer cook safely, read my beloved books, or even go for walks without assistance. I began selling items from our home to save for my surgery. Albert's collection of vintage watches went first, then my grandmother's silver tea set. Each sale was a small stab of pain, these treasured items leaving my possession so that I might see again. But even after selling what I could bear to part with, I was still far from the $20,000 needed. Sandra insisted I move in with her temporarily. "Your house isn't safe for you anymore, Tracy, just until we can get your eyes fixed." I resisted at first, clinging to my independence. Then one morning I misjudged the distance to the coffee table and fell, bruising my hip and wrist. Nothing was broken except my pride, but it was enough to make me accept Sandra's offer. My small home sat empty while I occupied Sandra's guest bedroom. She read to me in the evenings, helped me with correspondence, and drove me to appointments. My world had shrunk to the confines of her house, and though I was grateful for her kindness, a deep depression settled over me. Then, nearly 4 months after the canceled check, Greg appeared at Sandra's door. I was sitting in the living room when I heard his voice at the entrance. "I need to speak with my mother," he said, his tone businesslike. Sandra showed him in reluctantly, and I could make out his blurry form as he sat across from me. He was dressed in what appeared to be an expensive suit, his posture rigid. "Mom, I've been thinking about your situation," he began without preamble. "I believe I've found a solution that works for everyone." Hope flickered briefly. Had he finally come to his senses? Was he here to make things right? "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "I need the deed to your house," he said. "As collateral for a business opportunity with Diane's father. The property value would secure my position in his company." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "My house, Albert and I paid for that home over 30 years. It's all I have left." "It's sitting empty anyway," Greg countered. "This way it would serve a purpose. Once I'm established in Harold's company, I'll be able to take care of everything. Your surgery a better place for you to live everything." "No." The word came out firmly, surprising even me with its force. "That house is my home, not a bargaining chip for your ambitions." Greg's posture stiffened further. "You're not thinking clearly. This is a chance to secure our family's future. Diane's connections can open doors you can't imagine." "The answer is still no, Gregory." His tone turned cold. "This is what I get for trying to help you. I'm offering you a way forward, and you're too stubborn to see it." "Help me." I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. "You canceled the check for my surgery. You've been using my accounts for years. And now you want my house." Greg stood up abruptly. "You know what your problem is, Mom. You're selfish. Dad would be ashamed of how you're holding me back." His words cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. "Your father would be ashamed, all right, but not of me," I said quietly. "Please leave." "Fine. Sit here in the dark. See if I care anymore." He stormed out the door, slamming behind him. After he left, I sat motionless, his cruel words echoing in my mind. Sandra came in and sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. "He wanted my house, Sandra," I whispered. "My home. Like everything else wasn't enough." "That boy needs a reality check," she said firmly. "And you need a good cry and then a fresh start." That night alone in the guest room, I did cry. I cried for the sweet little boy who had once made me Mother's Day cards with crooked letters and too much glue. I cried for the hopes Albert and I had held for our only child. Mostly I cried for myself, wondering where I had gone wrong and what would become of me now. The next morning, still red-eyed and exhausted, I was sitting at Sandra's kitchen table when her phone rang. She answered it, then held it out to me. "It's for you," someone named Lawrence Harrington. I took the phone confused. "Hello?" "Mrs. Williams, this is Lawrence Harrington, from Harrington Phelps and Associates. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Eleanor Blackwood." The name sent a jolt through me. Eleanor had been my roommate in college before I met Albert. We had been inseparable for those 4 years, but after graduation, our lives had taken different paths. She had gone on to become a successful businesswoman, never marrying while I had built a life with Albert. We had kept in touch with Christmas cards for years, but even those had stopped a decade ago. "Eleanor," I managed to say, "is she all right?" There was a pause on the line. "I'm sorry to inform you that Miss Blackwood passed away 3 weeks ago, pancreatic cancer." Grief washed over me for the vibrant, ambitious friend I had once known so well. "I'm so sorry to hear that." "Mrs. Williams, the reason I'm calling is that Miss Blackwood named you as the sole beneficiary of her estate." I nearly dropped the phone. "There must be some mistake. We haven't spoken in years." "There's no mistake," Mr. Harrington assured me. "Miss Blackwood never married and had no children. In her will, she specifically mentioned your kindness during your college years and how you believed in her when no one else did. She wanted her fortune to go to the one person who saw her potential before she became successful." "Fortune," I repeated weakly. "Yes, Mrs. Williams. The estate is valued at approximately $80 million. The room seemed to spin around me. $80 million. That's correct. It includes investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and several business interests. If you're able to come to our offices, we can begin the process of transferring these assets to your name." I couldn't speak, couldn't form a coherent thought. Sandra, seeing my distress, took the phone from my hand. "Mr. Harrington, this is Sandra Walker Tracy's friend. She's a bit overwhelmed at the moment." "Yes, I understand. We can come to your office tomorrow morning. Thank you." After she hung up, she sat beside me, her eyes wide. "Tracy, did I hear that correctly? $80 million. I nodded mutely, still unable to process the information. "Well," Sandra said after a moment, "I think the first order of business is getting those cataracts fixed, don't you?" In that moment, through the fog of grief for Eleanor, shock at the inheritance, and the lingering pain of Greg's betrayal, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just for restored vision, but for a future I could never have imagined. I decided right then that no one, not even Sandra, would know the full extent of the inheritance until everything was finalized. After Greg's betrayal, I needed time to adjust to this new reality and decide how to move forward without outside influence or pressure. The next morning, Sandra drove me to the offices of Harrington Phelps and Associates. My first request, after verifying everything with Mr. Harrington, was to schedule my cataract surgery immediately at the best facility available. Within 3 days, I was admitted to the Visionary Center, the most prestigious ophthalmological clinic in Seattle. The surgeon, Dr. Patel, was kind and reassuring. "Mrs. Williams, you'll notice a dramatic improvement immediately after surgery. It's quite remarkable how quickly patients recover their sight." The procedure itself was quick and painless. When the bandages came off the following day, I gasped. The world had color again. I could see the compassionate smile on Dr. Patel's face, the pattern on Sandra's dress, even the small framed diplomas on the wall across the room. I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I can see everything." "That's what we like to hear," Dr. Patel said, squeezing my hand gently. The restoration of my vision felt like a rebirth. Simple pleasures became extraordinary gifts. Reading the newspaper over morning coffee, watching birds at the feeder outside Sandra's window, seeing my own face clearly in the mirror for the first time in years. After my recovery, Mr. Harrington helped me assemble a team of financial advisors to manage my unexpected wealth. Eleanor had been not just successful, but brilliant in her investments. Her portfolio was diverse and stable, spanning technology, real estate, and sustainable energy. "Mrs. Williams, with proper management, this fortune could last for generations," explained Melissa Chen, my new financial advisor. "We should discuss your priorities for these funds." My first priority was creating a foundation for elderly care with a special focus on vision treatments for seniors who couldn't afford them. The Eleanor Blackwood Foundation was established with an initial endowment of $10 million. My second decision was more personal. With Sandra's help, I began looking for a new home. Not because I didn't love the house Albert and I had shared, but because I needed a fresh start somewhere without painful memories of Greg's betrayal. The property we found was beyond anything I could have imagined, a stunning 6-bedroom mansion in Medina, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the Seattle area. It sat on 3 acres of manicured grounds with views of Lake Washington. The grand entryway featured a crystal chandelier that reminded me of the one Eleanor and I had admired in a magazine during our college days, dreaming of lives we thought we'd never have. "It's too much," I protested when Sandra first showed me the listing. "Tracy, you have $80 million, Sandra reminded me gently. "This is actually quite reasonable for your new circumstances." After decades of careful budgeting, the price tag of $7 million seemed astronomical. But as I toured the property, something shifted inside me. This wasn't about extravagance. It was about creating a new life, one where I could help others while also finding peace for myself. I purchased the mansion and hired a small, discreet staff, a housekeeper named Louisa, a groundskeeper named Paul, and a personal assistant named Jennifer. All signed confidentiality agreements, as I still wasn't ready for the world, especially Greg, to know about my changed circumstances. My physical transformation followed naturally. A lifetime of budget haircuts at the local salon gave way to appointments with Antonio, a stylist to Seattle's elite. My wardrobe of practical, modest clothing was replaced by pieces that were elegant yet comfortable, befitting my age, but of a quality I'd never experienced. "Mrs. Williams, you have such a natural grace," Antonio said during one appointment. "We're just enhancing what was always there." The greatest joy of my new wealth was the ability to help others anonymously. Through my foundation, I funded cataract surgeries for dozens of seniors that first year alone. Each thank you letter from recipients, each story of restored independence, healed something in my own heart. Sandra was the only person who knew the full extent of my transformation. She moved into the guest house on my property, insisting on maintaining her independence while still being close enough to share this journey with me. "I never thought I'd live in a place like this," she marveled one evening, as we sat on the terrace overlooking the lake. "Eleanor must have really loved you to leave you all this." "We were like sisters once," I said, remembering the ambitious young woman who had stayed up late studying while other students partied. She always said she'd show everyone who doubted her. I guess she did. 3 years passed in this new life. I developed new friendships through charitable work, traveled to places Albert and I had only dreamed of visiting, and slowly healed from Greg's betrayal. I occasionally heard news about him through mutual acquaintances, never letting on that I had any special interest. Apparently, the extravagant birthday party for Harold Thompson hadn't yielded the results Greg had hoped for. The economy had taken a downturn, and Thompson's company had been hit particularly hard. Greg had been given a middle management position but hadn't advanced despite his desperate efforts to impress. Diane's family, once so wealthy and connected, had lost significant assets in the market crash. Their influence had waned considerably, leaving Greg without the shortcuts to success he had counted on. I felt no satisfaction in hearing of their struggles. Instead, a quiet sadness remained for the son who had placed material success above all else, including his mother's well-being. Then came the day I had somehow known would eventually arrive. I was reviewing proposals for the foundation's next round of funding when Jennifer entered my study. "Mrs. Williams, Sandra's daughter, posted a photo of your home on social media. It seems your son has discovered your new address. He's at the gate with his wife, insisting on seeing you." My heart raced, but I maintained my composure. "Let them in, Jennifer, and please ask Louisa to prepare tea in the main sitting room." As I watched from the window, a luxury car I didn't recognize pulled up the circular driveway. Even from a distance, I could see Greg and Diane's expressions of shock as they took in the scale of the mansion. The Greg who emerged from the car looked different from the son I remembered. His designer clothes seemed slightly worn, his posture less confident. I smoothed my silk blouse, touched the pearl earrings that had been Eleanor's, and prepared to face the son who had chosen a party over his mother's sight. I seated myself in the main sitting room, taking a moment to appreciate the beautiful space with its soaring ceilings and wall of windows overlooking the lake. Louisa had arranged tea on the antique table, the silver service gleaming in the afternoon light. I heard Jennifer greeting Greg and Diane at the door, their voices echoing in the marble foyer. When they entered the room, I stood to greet them, observing their reactions with my now perfect vision. Greg's mouth was slightly open, his eyes darting around the room, calculating values and status symbols. Diane's expression was a mixture of shock and immediate envy, her gaze lingering on the artwork and furnishings. Mom Greg's voice held disbelief. "What is all this?" I gestured to the sitting area. "Please have a seat. Would you like some tea?" They sat stiffly on the edge of the velvet sofa, looking out of place, despite their attempts at maintaining composure. Diane's designer handbag, which I now recognized as last season's model, was clutched tightly in her lap. "You look different," Greg said, studying my appearance. Indeed, I was different. Not just the tailored clothing or the professionally styled silver hair, but the confidence that comes from standing on solid ground, physically, financially, and emotionally. "Life changes us all," I replied, simply pouring tea into fine china cups. "It's been 3 years since we last spoke." Greg cleared his throat. "Yes, well, we've been meaning to reconnect. Things have been challenging lately." Oh, I passed them each a cup, noting how Diane's eyes widened at the sight of the diamond ring on my finger, a gift I had given myself on my 73rd birthday. "The market downturn affected everyone," Greg said vaguely. "Harold's company included. I'm still there, of course, but there have been adjustments." "I see," I said, though what I really saw was the desperation behind his casual facade. Diane spoke up for the first time. "Your home is absolutely stunning, Mother Williams. Perhaps you could give us a tour." I nodded and spent the next 30 minutes showing them through the mansion. With each room, their expressions grew more calculating. The library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The gourmet kitchen where my personal chef prepared meals 3 times a week. The conservatory filled with tropical plants. The media room with its state-of-the-art equipment. "And here's the East Wing," I said, opening double doors to reveal a suite of rooms. It includes 2 bedrooms, a private sitting room, and a bathroom. Diane's eyes lit up. This would make a perfect guest wing. Yes, I agreed for when my foundation board members visit from out of town. We returned to the sitting room where Louisa had refreshed the tea. Greg and Diane exchanged glances before Greg leaned forward. Mom, we have to ask. How is all this possible? Your teacher's pension, Dad's insurance. It doesn't add up. I took a sip of tea before answering. An old friend passed away and left me her estate. It was quite unexpected. An inheritance, Greg's voice rose slightly. Why didn't you tell us? We weren't exactly in communication, I reminded him gently. The last time we spoke, you were asking for the deed to my house. He had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. That was a misunderstanding. I was only trying to help secure our family's future. And how is your future looking now? I asked. Greg and Diane exchanged another glance before he sighed deeply. Not good, Mom. The truth is, we're in trouble. Harold's company downsized, and my position was reduced. We had to sell our condo. The bank is threatening foreclosure on our new place. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, he was still my son. We've been staying with Diane's parents, he continued, but their situation isn't much better since the market crash. Their properties were heavily leveraged. Diane interjected her voice, taking on a honeyed tone I remembered from years ago. That's actually why we wanted to reconnect Mother Williams. Family should stick together during difficult times, don't you think? Family is indeed important, I agreed. This house is so large for just one person, she continued, gesturing to the spacious room, and that east wing is perfect. We could help manage the property, keep you company in your golden years. There it was, the real reason for their visit. What Diane means, Greg added quickly, is that we want to be here for you, like you were always there for me growing up. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. Where had his concern been when I was living in darkness? When I needed surgery that he could easily have afforded? That's a generous offer, I said carefully. Greg became more animated, sensing an opportunity. It makes perfect sense, Mom. You have all this space. We need a fresh start. And of course, eventually, as your only child, I'd inherit everything anyway. This way, we could help manage your affairs now. And there it was. The truth behind the sudden reappearance of my son after 3 years of silence. Not concern for my well-being, not regret for past actions, but calculation about what he stood to gain. I set down my teacup and stood. Greg and Diane scrambled to their feet as I walked toward the front door. They followed, confusion evident on their faces. Mom, where are you going? We haven't finished discussing our arrangement. I turned to face them at the door, seeing them clearly, not just with my restored vision, but with the clarity that comes from painful wisdom. Gregory, there is no arrangement to discuss. You made your choice 3 years ago when you decided your father-in-law's birthday party was more important than your mother's ability to see. You chose status and appearances over compassion and family. That was different, he protested. I was building connections. It was an investment. And now you see me as another investment opportunity, I said. Some things never change. Diane stepped forward. Mother Williams, surely you wouldn't turn family away in their time of need. I wouldn't, I agreed. Family supports each other through good times and bad, but family doesn't use each other as stepping stones or ATMs. Family doesn't leave each other in darkness when they have the means to help. So that's it. Greg's voice turned hard. One mistake, and you're punishing us forever. This isn't punishment, Gregory. This is consequence. You're facing the natural result of choices you made freely, just as I'm living with the results of choices I've made since then. I opened the front door, the afternoon sunlight streaming into the foyer. I wish you both well, truly. But my home is not available to you, and neither is my bank account. You can't be serious, Greg sputtered, his face reddening. After everything I've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Gregory? I asked quietly. He had no answer. Goodbye, I said, holding the door wide. I hope you find your way. You'll regret this, Diane hissed as they stepped outside. We're family. You have obligations. My only obligation is to live truthfully and compassionately, I replied. I hope you both learn to do the same." I watched as they walked to their car, their shoulders stiff with indignation. As they drove away, I closed the door not just on them, but on the guilt and uncertainty that had plagued me since taking control of my life. Sandra emerged from where she had been discreetly waiting in the library. "Are you okay?" she asked, putting an arm around my shoulders. "Yes," I said, surprised to find it was true. "For the first time in years, I think I really am." In the weeks following Greg and Diane's visit, I experienced a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that I had stood my ground. Sadness for the relationship that seemed irreparably broken. Guilt wondering if I had somehow failed as a mother. Peace knowing I had made the right decision for my well-being. One evening, sitting in my library with a cup of tea, I decided to write a letter to Greg. Not to send, but to clarify my own thoughts and feelings. I took out a sheet of cream stationery and began to write. "Dear Gregory, there was a time when you were the center of my world. I still remember the weight of you in my arms as a newborn, your tiny fingers wrapping around mine. I remember your first steps, your first words, the pride in your father's eyes when you won the science fair in 5th grade. Somewhere along the way you changed. Or perhaps the seeds were always there and I was too blind with mother's love to see them clearly. The constant reaching for more, the dissatisfaction with what you had, the willingness to step on others to climb higher. I want you to know that I don't hate you for what you did. The canceled check, the cruel words, the years of silence. I'm sad for the man you've become so focused on appearances and status that you've lost sight of what truly matters in life. I hope someday you'll understand that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or social connections. It's measured in kindness, in integrity, in the lives you touch positively along the way. My door will always be open if you ever truly want to reconnect as mother and son, not as financial opportunity and investor. Until then, I wish you healing and wisdom. Love, Mom." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. The act of writing it had been therapeutic, releasing feelings I hadn't fully acknowledged. After much reflection, I made a decision that surprised even me. I established a small trust fund for Greg, but with conditions. To access any funds he would need to complete 1,000 hours of volunteer work at a vision clinic, helping people with limited resources receive eye care. The trust was structured so that he couldn't access the principal, only a modest annual income after fulfilling the service requirement. "Are you sure about this?" Mr. Harrington asked when I outlined the plan. "After what he did, I'm not doing it for him," I explained. "I'm doing it for the person he might become if given the right opportunity for growth, and for those who will benefit from his service hours." As months passed, I threw myself into expanding the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation. What had begun as a small initiative funding cataract surgeries grew into a comprehensive program supporting elderly independence across Washington state. We provided not just vision care, but transportation services, home modifications for accessibility and technology training to help seniors stay connected. I formed new friendships with people who knew nothing of my wealth or family drama, who valued me for my ideas and compassion. The foundation board members became like family, each bringing unique perspectives and experiences to our work. Sandra remained my closest confidant, now living comfortably in the guest house on my property. Her children and grandchildren visited, often filling the mansion with the laughter and energy I had once hoped would come from my own family. "You know," Tracy Sandra said one afternoon as we watched her grandchildren playing on the lawn, "you've created something beautiful here. Not just the foundation, but this whole new life." From darkness to light, I agreed. In more ways than one. About a year after Greg and Diane's visit, I received an unexpected letter. The return address was unfamiliar, but when I opened it, I recognized Diane's handwriting. "Dear Mrs. Williams, this is perhaps the most difficult letter I've ever written. Greg doesn't know I'm contacting you, and I ask that you keep this correspondence between us. Greg and I have separated. After our visit to your home last year, something changed between us. Perhaps seeing you so transformed, so at peace despite everything, made me question the choices that led us to where we are. I want to apologize for my role in what happened with your surgery. I knew about the canceled check. I encouraged Greg to redirect those funds to my father's party, believing it would secure our future. The truth is, I was raised to see money and status as the ultimate goals, and I passed those values to Greg, who was already inclined in that direction. I'm not asking for forgiveness or financial help. I've moved back to my hometown and am working as a receptionist at my cousin's dental practice. It's humble work, but honest. I simply wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I caused and am trying to build a better life based on different values. Respectfully, Diane. The letter left me stunned. Of all the outcomes I might have imagined, Diane's apparent transformation wasn't one of them. After careful consideration, I wrote back a short note acknowledging her apology and wishing her well in her new path. 2 months later, I invited her for tea. Our meeting was awkward at first, both of us unsure how to navigate this new territory. But as conversation flowed, I saw genuine change in the woman who had once looked at me with barely concealed disdain. "I don't know what happened to Greg after we separated," she admitted. "Last I heard, he was working for a tech startup and living in a small apartment downtown." "Change can be good," I said. "For all of us." A tentative friendship formed between Diane and me, surprising us both. She occasionally volunteered at foundation events, her organizational skills proving valuable. I was careful to maintain boundaries, not offering financial support, but providing something perhaps more valuable: mentorship and respect. Nearly 5 years after the canceled check that changed everything, my doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. When Jennifer announced that Greg was at the door, my heart raced just as it had the first time. The man who stood before me looked markedly different from both the ambitious son I had raised and the entitled visitor from 2 years earlier. He was simply dressed, his expression somber. "Mom," he said, his voice catching, "I don't have any right to be here, I know that, but I needed to see you." I invited him in and we sat in the garden rather than the formal sitting room. For several minutes, he couldn't seem to find words. "I saw an article about your foundation," he finally said. "About the elderly woman in Tacoma who regained her sight after 5 years of blindness because of your program." I nodded, remembering Martha Jenkins, a 78-year-old former librarian whose story had been featured in the Seattle Times. "It hit me all at once," Greg continued. "What I took from you, not just money but years of your life, your independence, your dignity." His eyes filled with tears. "I've been telling myself a story for years about who I am, about what I deserve, and it's been a lie." I sat quietly, letting him speak. "I'm not asking for money or a place to stay. I wouldn't insult you like that again. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, truly sorry, and to let you know I'm trying to be better." "What are you doing now?" I asked. "I work at a community center downtown, teaching computer skills to seniors, actually." He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. The irony isn't lost on me. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon. Really talked, perhaps for the first time in decades, about his childhood, his ambitions, his regrets, about my new life and the work that fulfilled me. Not as mother and son seeking reconciliation, but as two adults acknowledging a shared past while respecting separate futures. Before he left, I told him about the trust I had established. "The volunteer requirement still stands," I said firmly. "This isn't about buying forgiveness." "I wouldn't want it any other way," he replied, and I believed him. Our relationship rebuilt slowly after that day. Weekly phone calls, occasional dinners. He began volunteering at the foundation, first in small ways, then taking on more responsibility as he proved himself trustworthy. The trust funds remained untouched, as he insisted on making his own way. On a warm evening 7 years after that fateful canceled check, I sat on my terrace watching the sunset over Lake Washington. The beauty of the golden light on the water, the clarity with which I could see distant boats and birds in flight, never failed to move me. Sandra joined me, bringing glasses of iced tea. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I was just thinking about vision," I replied. "Not just the physical kind, but the ability to truly see what matters." "You've certainly gained that kind of vision," she said. Through difficulty, I acknowledged. It took losing my sight to truly see my son clearly. It took his betrayal to find my strength. It took darkness to appreciate light. The foundation now funded thousands of surgeries annually across the country. Greg headed our outreach program, his natural charisma finally channeled towards something meaningful. Diane managed volunteer coordination, her organizational skills flourishing in service to others. My journey from a teacher with failing vision to a philanthropist with clear purpose had been unexpected and painful at times. But sitting there watching the setting sun with perfect clarity, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult path that had led to this peaceful moment. Life rarely gives us what we expect. Sometimes it takes away what we thought we couldn't live without. Sometimes it gives us gifts we never dreamed of receiving. The wisdom comes in recognizing that both loss and gain offer opportunities for growth, for seeing more clearly what truly matters. Have you ever had to close a door on someone you loved to protect your own well-being? Or experienced an unexpected blessing after a painful betrayal? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else find clarity in their own difficult situation. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it today. Remember, sometimes the clearest vision comes after the darkest moments. Thank you for listening, and may you always see your own worth clearly.